let's move on to this new section. So this is an idea that Evan kind of came up with last night as a new section that we felt like we could offer some value on the podcast. And I'm pretty excited to dive into this. So we're calling it the AI Edge. And we basically just want to give tips that help you gain an advantage using artificial intelligence. I think that quote that I just said that I saw on Instagram earlier today, 30% of professionals have tried ChatGPT at their jobs, is indicative of where we're heading, just in terms of how we supplement ourselves with this software. So we wanted to just give some tips on how we're using it to be more efficient or to do things that we think are cool. I'll say a lot of what I'm doing with it involves writing. So that's why, ChatGPT is great with that, whether it's writing and communication for my job within sales or whether it's writing and communication for things like middle tech. So let's just kind of get into first a broad overview of ChatGPT, how it was created, its limitations, its capabilities. I know we talked about it before. I think it's just helpful at the top of this new kind of section here to talk about that. So Evan, you're pretty good at describing how this thing was built, what it can do, what it can't do. So dive into that part of it real quick, and then let's share some tips with the listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So the whole generative AI model or movement, rather, and I'll kind of back up, has been growing over the last several years. And basically the idea of that is using vast amounts of data and really powerful models to produce content using basically content on the internet as inspiration and using predictive models to basically generate new content based on what you prompt it to spit out. So basically what that means is artificial intelligence is taking, let's say, a sentence that you describe an image with, and then spitting out that image based on that sentence. So in this case, ChatGPT is very language based. And so if you put in, write me a blog about, let's say, tigers in India and what they like to eat, it will put out a blog. And if you tell it even further to write a 500 word blog, it'll write something close to a 500 word blog. So it's really something that is, you give it a command, or a prompt is the name of that, and then it spits out a result, which is being generated by the model and the data it has behind it. And so OpenAI, their ChatGPT model in particular, has licensed vast amounts of internet data from many different locations across the internet, and use that data to build a very powerful predictive model. And then when you type in a command again, it spits it out. But the unique thing about ChatGPT that's so different about artificial intelligence and why it's grown so fast and kind of captured the attention of the public is it's just done in like a chat interface that feels like a text message. Mm-hmm. That is the first time artificial intelligence has really been easily consumed by the public without any previous knowledge. So that's why it's a big deal. They open it up to the public. You just go to openai.com and it will pull up ChatGPT for you to play with and try. Right now, the way that you can access it is just, like I said, through that website. But here soon, I'm sure they're going to start charging for it. But if you go on there now, the way that they're allowing access is if there's not a lot of demand for it. So you might go on the website, it might tell you can't use it right now because there's a lot of high traffic. So that just tells me that they're about to start charging for it because...
Well, they introduced a paid tier, right? Like $47 a month or something?
I haven't seen that on their actual website. I think they're starting to put out like content to see what the internet feels. Yeah. But all that to say, the first model that I think everybody should play with is ChatGPT.
For sure.
I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, can you sit me down and take me to coffee and tell me how to use this? And I think this is a great segment to kind of reach a broader audience with these kind of tips.
Yeah. I think the one last thing I'll say just around like limitations of ChatGPT, Evan mentioned it was trained on the internet, on internet data. That's internet data from 2021 back. So it's not currently connected to the internet. So anything you ask about like current events or things that have happened post 2021, it's not going to be able to perform that. So that's likely what we predict is going to happen, is why Microsoft has invested billions and billions and billions of dollars into OpenAI, is because Microsoft is eventually going to build a search competitor to Google that is powered by this software. So that is an overview of what it is. let's talk a little bit about how to use it effectively. So the first tip that I want to give about using ChatGPT effectively is learning to communicate with it effectively. And just to describe this point, I want to tell a quick anecdote from an assignment that I had. I was probably in middle school, where the teacher essentially asked us students to create a instruction manual for creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then he stood up at the front of the class and tried to use our instruction manual to create that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you've done this little experiment before, this like team, it's kind of like a team building exercise. You know that the teacher gets up there and like if it's not in the instructions, they just don't do it. So you have to be like super descriptive on how you describe building that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. ChatGPT is no different. The more detail and context that you give it, the more relevant response it's going to give to you. So if you just say like, write me a blog about tigers, that's going to go out and just write a blog that might be all over the place, might not even contain any of the points that you want it to hit. I found the more effective way to get it to produce content for you that's more relevant to what you want is to first in your own head, and this is where human creativity and like your own take on things comes into it, lay out like the main points that you want that blog to have. Say like, okay, I want to talk about tigers' diets, and then I want to talk about their ecosystem, and I want to talk about how they're endangered, include these points, write it in this tone, and then you plug that into ChatGPT, and that's where things get really wild. So the more context, the more detail, the better you learn to communicate with the software, the more relevant responses you're going to get from it, and the more effective it's just going to be all around. Do you have anything to add to that tip?
No, I think that's great. I think that's kind of a great place to start is just be very cognizant of, what you're typing in. They're very finicky models. There is going to be this idea of kind of prompt engineering, where basically the people that can write the best prompts are going to get the best, outputs, and people are going to gravitate towards those quality prompts. So this is kind of the early stages of this idea of prompt engineering. The better you can write a prompt, the better you're going to be at utilizing this technology.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Tip number 2. Do you want to dive into this one or do you want
Go
me
ahead.
to? Okay. The second one that I put down here is ask for elaboration and specificity. So when let's say, for example, a lot of my friends have been using it to help them brainstorm, like whether it's a work assignment or, what have you. So I'm going to use an example that an actual friend told me this week. He helps manage musicians, and he was talking with a record label, and they're like, hey, tell us what you're going to do over the next year. I think like 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years for this artist to help grow them. He went to ChatGPT and put in how to grow an artist from 4,000 monthly Spotify listeners to 10,000 in X amount of time. And it spits out 10 suggestions from that. So then what this tip really involves is it's going to spit out 10 responses or like 10 answers like here's how you can grow that artist, for example. What you need to do from there, don't just take that on the surface. Take each of those responses it gives you and then say, be more specific, elaborate on this. How can I do this part specifically? The more you ask for specificity and elaboration from it, and you literally can just type, be more elaborate. And oftentimes that will give you an even more detailed and in-depth response. But you can start broad, see what it produces for you, find something you want to latch onto, and then really start to dig down into it and say, hey, be as specific as you can, elaborate on this, change your wording here and there, tweak it. And that's really what can produce some pretty incredible results for you too. So that friend that I mentioned literally created a whole proposal for a music label that details how he's going to help this artist grow. And now, given he has a lot of experience in this, he knows what he's doing. It's not like it's just, he could have done it without ChatGPT, but it supercharged his creative process. It basically just allowed him to leapfrog the brainstorming process and just get to the kind of this final endpoint where he can refine things, use his own expertise to make it more relevant. And anyway, that's how I've kind of been using it as well. Is just it's a simple thing. Just ask it to elaborate. Do you have any experience with that?
I do. So for instance, in my own company, I was putting together a proposal to our engineering team to incentivize them to get their engineering, sprints done as fast as possible and give them, bonuses if they reached certain milestones. And I said, hey, ChatGPT, how should I incentivize my team? Give me some some tips, and they gave me some tips that, a few of them I already had put into place, some of them I didn't. So really, I think what we're talking about here is the idea of, if a professional is using ChatGPT, and let's just assume, in some industry, all the professionals are using ChatGPT, then the professionals that are the most creative and think outside the box are going to win, because ChatGPT is going to give the most basic answers, the stuff that should be obvious, in hindsight, and then somebody's going to have to put their own creative flair into it. So I think what this is ultimately going to do is push every industry forward very rapidly, because everybody's going to have some level of understanding about a topic, because ChatGPT can teach them very quickly. And it's going to be, how do I continue to dig deeper in creative ways to create something that, ChatGPT couldn't? That's going to be what happens in every industry. Is it's all going to become very similar if everybody uses ChatGPT, and the ones that stand out are going to be the ones that augment ChatGPT with their own creative processes. So, Nick, in that case, our friend who's in the music industry, is a great example.
Yeah, I love it. I totally agree with you there. All right, third and final tip for giving yourself an advantage with artificial intelligence is role playing. So what I mean by role playing is literally assign some sort of role or identity to ChatGPT, and then use that to frame the question or prompt that you're giving it. So I saw this one on Instagram. This came from 137 PM's account. They shared, I think, a TikTok of somebody going in and essentially giving man, the more you say that, the more of a tongue twister it turns into. ChatGPT, basically saying, hey, pretend you're a doctor and I'm a patient and you're giving me advice on how to live a healthier life. When you frame it and say, hey, you have this area of expertise, that helps frame the prompt a little bit more efficiently and maybe a little bit more cohesively or concisely, rather, for how to give you a response back. So really, all of these tips, I mean, that's none of these tips are super groundbreaking. It's just how can we communicate with this AI software to help us get more relevant responses from it.
Yeah, I typed in a random one here. Yeah. I said, act like you're Benjamin Franklin and tell me about your birth. And it generated an awesome response here. It says, greetings, my name is Benjamin Franklin. I was born January 17th, 1706 in Boston. And it just keeps going. There's about 5 paragraphs here of Benjamin Franklin talking to me through ChatGPT, in his own voice. And it might not be his own voice, but if the data in the model was, maybe some of it was directly from autobiographies or biographies from Benjamin Franklin, and he had quotes in there, it might know how he speaks, and it might actually talk like that. I could say, hey, act like you're Benjamin Franklin and you're a pirate and tell me about your birth. And it'll speak like it's a pirate, as if it was Benjamin Franklin talking in first person about his birth and the way he was, raised. Yeah. That's kind of how this stuff starts to get crazy. And the more creative and the better kind of prompts you put in there, the better results you're going to get. That's what's fun about this.
And that's the whole point here. This stuff is so fun to play with. So the best way to learn it is go and play with it. Don't wait until you have a perfect use case and be like, oh, could ChatGPT help with this? No, just go pull it up. If you can get access to it, go and just type in random shit, see what pops up. So that is the AI Edge. We're very excited about this little segment. We're just going to give 3 tips each week at the end of the podcast, talking about how you can use artificial intelligence to give yourself an advantage in whatever it is you do.